14 people sat around the long table on the ninth floor of Brant Development when the door opened and a man in work clothes walked in. Metal dust still on his left shoulder. A thin folder under his arm. Laura Brant stood at the head of the table. She didn't wait for him to sit. Go back to your scrapyard. This is a federal review, not a flea market. The room went quiet. Every face turned toward the man in the doorway. He didn't leave. He set the folder on the edge of the table, slow, steady, as if time belonged to him. In the corner, a man in civilian dress, no one had noticed him all morning, rose from his chair. He walked to where the scrapyard owner was standing, stopped, straightened his back, then raised his hand to his brow, precise, unhurried, and saluted. Why would a retired general salute a man who runs a scrapyard? And how far would 6 words follow Laura Brant after that morning? Stay with me. 6 weeks earlier. Matt Dawson killed the plasma arc and pulled off his gloves when the phone buzzed against the workbench. He picked it up, cradled it between his jaw and shoulder while he wiped his hands on his jeans. The caller was a project manager named Rick Torres, general contractor side on a redevelopment job called Mill Creek, south end of Knoxville, Tennessee. Torres had gone through the bids for the steel demolition scope and stopped on one of them. Your structural breakdown, Torres said. I've been at this 22 years. I've never seen a demolition sub send anything like it. What do you need? Matt said. I need you on the job. Can you start in 2 weeks? Behind him, Sam sat in a folding chair by the shop door, working through a peanut butter sandwich and watching his father the way he did every morning before the school bus came. Still, patient, comfortable with silence the way most 9-year-olds aren't. He'd been sitting in this shop since he was old enough to hold a sandwich, and he'd never once asked his father what the machines did. He just watched. Matt told Torres he'd look at the contract and call back. Set the phone down. Glanced at Sam. The boy gave him nothing, just chewed, and picked up the torch. The blue flame came back. Sam took another bite. 12 miles east, on the 9th floor of a glass and limestone building on Gay Street, Laura Brant was already on her 3rd report of the morning. Mill Creek was a $28 million conversion, a former textile plant being turned into a regional logistics hub, partially funded through a federal brownfield redevelopment grant. It was the largest project Brant Development had taken on since Laura stepped into the CEO chair 18 months ago, after her father stepped out. The federal team would run a progress review in 2 weeks. If it went well, the second disbursement, $11 million, would release. If it didn't, every board member who'd voted to let a 35-year-old woman run their company would have a number to point at. Neil Gentry knocked once and walked in. 46 years old, 11 years at Brant, longer than Laura had held any title here. He set a subcontractor summary on her desk. Few new names from the GC. I'll vet them. Laura nodded without looking up. She relied on Neil's operational side the way a building relies on its foundation, not because she'd chosen it, but because it was already there when she arrived. He stepped out. In the hallway, Neil opened the sub-list and read it line by line. His finger stopped. Dawson Salvage, owner, Matt Dawson. He read the name again. Slowly. 2018. Hamilton County. A safety report that shut down a $14 million project, cost him his position, and put him on a plane to Knoxville to start over somewhere no one knew his name. He folded the paper, slipped it into his jacket, and kept walking. 3 days later, Laura drove out to the Mill Creek site for a preliminary walk. Standard procedure before the federal review window. The old textile buildings were massive and rust-streaked. Scaffolding had gone up on the west end. A crew was marking structural steel with chalk paint, red, blue, yellow, in a system she hadn't seen before. A man in a gray t-shirt stood on the 2nd level, his hand flat against a flange, eyes tracing the weld line. No tablet, no clipboard, just hands and attention. Rick Torres fell into step beside her. That's Dawson, the demo sub. Laura watched him for a moment. He moved along the beam the way someone reads Braille, slow, precise, seeing with his fingers what no one else in the building could see with their eyes. He any good? She said. Best bid I've had in 5 years. She nodded and moved on. Up on the scaffolding, Matt glanced down. A woman in a hard hat and heels, walking the site with Torres. She looked up at the steel once, then at her phone, then kept walking. He turned back to the flange. Not his business. The following week, Neil walked into Laura's office with a manila folder. The demo sub Torres brought on. Dawson Salvage. He set the folder on the edge of her desk. Small operation. Revenue under $300,000. No record of commercial scale work anywhere in the state. If this guy shows up to the federal review next to our engineers, it raises questions we don't want to answer. Laura opened it. Business registration, Dawson Salvage LLC, filed 4 years ago. Insurance certificate, minimum coverage. Knox County salvage yard permit. 3 pages. Nothing else. Who is he? Runs a junkyard off Route 35. Buys scrap metal, cuts it, resells by weight. Laura looked at the 3 pages one more time, then closed the folder. I'll tell Torres we don't need him in the room. That afternoon, Torres called. Ms. Brandt, I understand you want to pull Dawson from the federal presentation. I need to push back. Laura picked up her pen. Set it down. Go ahead. His bid included a structural condition analysis that's better than anything my own engineers produced. He identified stress fractures in 2 headers we'd marked as sound. The man has an active PE license, professional engineer, and 12 years of military construction before this. Army, bridges and infrastructure, Corps of Engineers. Laura was quiet for a moment. Military, 11 years. Combat zones included. She looked at Neil's folder. 3 pages. No PE license. No military service record. Thank you, Rick. I'll take another look. She hung up and opened her laptop. Tennessee Board of Professional Engineers, Public Registry. She typed the name and waited. The result loaded in 4 seconds. Dawson, Matthew R., PE license, issued 2012. Status, active. Below the name, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers affiliate, 2008 through 2019. 11 years building bridges for the United States Army. 3 federal infrastructure projects listed under his credential, including one at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, 2016. And now he ran a scrapyard off a state highway. Laura sat with that for a long moment. She looked at the folder Neil had assembled. Thin, clean, and now she understood, incomplete. Then she closed the laptop. She didn't call Neil to ask why the file was missing half the man's career. She didn't call Torres back to reverse her decision. She picked up the next report and kept working. But the question had planted itself, and she could feel it putting down roots. Thursday afternoon, Laura drove to the Mill Creek site. She told herself it was a routine first-week check. Matt was on the ground level, crouching beside a column base, marking it with blue chalk. His crew was cutting a corroded crossbeam 1 level up. The air tasted like iron and wet concrete. She walked up to him. He stood, chalk still in his hand. Dawson. Ms. Brandt. You're ahead of your schedule. Should finish early if the weather holds. She looked at the blue mark on the column, then at the red marks farther down the row, and the yellow ones near the east wall. Consistent, methodical, color-coded with the kind of precision that comes from doing something 10,000 times. Laura had walked construction sites since she was 16, trailing her father through rebar and mud. She knew what discipline looked like. How long have you been doing structural work? She said. Matt looked at her, not at the column, not at the ceiling, at her. He took a moment. 16 years. Give or take. She nodded once, turned, and walked toward the east section. Matt watched her go. 4 steps, 5, 6, then crouched back down and picked up the chalk. Over the next week, Neil moved quietly. He sent an internal memo to the operations team. The Federal Review presenter list was finalized. Only Brandt development personnel and the GC's project manager would attend. Subcontractors were not included. The memo didn't mention Dawson by name. It didn't need to. At the Mill Creek site, Matt kept working. He was 2 days ahead of schedule. His chalk mark system had spread. Torres's own crew adopted it for the adjacent sections because it was faster and more readable than anything they had. On Tuesday, Matt was on the 2nd level scaffolding tearing out a corroded beam when he noticed something across the gap. The east wing, not his section. New steel. Recently installed by the general contractor's structural crew. He climbed down during his lunch break and walked over. Ran his hand along the flange of a new beam. Checked the mill stamp. Looked at the grade marking. A 36. The project specification attached to his demolition contract called for A572, grade 50. Different steel, lower yield strength, lower tensile capacity. Could be a procurement error. Could be an approved substitution. Could be something else. He pulled his notebook from his back pocket and wrote down the location, the batch number, and what he saw. He didn't say anything to anyone. He was the demolition sub, not the structural engineer of record. But 12 years of Army field work had made note-taking involuntary, like checking your mirrors before changing lanes. Wednesday afternoon, Laura came through the site with 2 Brandt engineers. She passed Matt's section on the way to the east wing. He was at the base of a column, looking up, notebook open. "Everything on track?" she said. He closed the notebook. "On track." She glanced at the column, blue chalk, salvageable, then at him. Then she kept walking. Matt watched her go and turned back to his work. That night, Laura read through the final presenter list at her desk at home. Matt Dawson was not on it. She thought about Torres's call, about the PE license, about 11 years with the Army Corps. A part of her wanted to ask Neil why his file had been gutted. Another part, the part steering a $28 million project under a federal microscope, needed the review to go clean. No surprises. She didn't add Matt's name to the list. She didn't call Torres. She chose silence, and she didn't know yet what that silence would cost. 5 days before the federal review, Neil received the attendee confirmation from the federal team. He scanned the names, all expected, until the last line. Carl F. Harmon, BG, Ret, Civilian Technical Advisor, USACE Knoxville District, Observer. He didn't recognize the name, didn't look it up, filed it, and moved to the next email. At the site, Matt found a third discrepancy. He was on the scaffolding in his demo zone, looking across at the east wing through a gap in the wall, when he spotted batch markings on another set of new beams. Same issue. A 36 where the spec called for A572. 3 separate locations now. 3 entries in his notebook. He still didn't report it. Not because he was hiding anything, but because his chain was Rick Torres, and Torres hadn't asked. In the Army, you reported up your chain. Out here, the chain ended at a demolition contract, and nobody above it had come looking. He closed the notebook. 3 locations. 3 sets of beams carrying less than the drawings called for. If someone built the second story this wing was designed for, the difference would matter. Not today, but eventually. He put the notebook away and climbed back up to his own section. That afternoon, Torres called. "Dawson, I tried to get you into the federal review. Brandt shut it down. I'm sorry." "All right. You should be in that room. You know that. I have a demolition contract, not a presentation contract." Torres was quiet for a moment. "That's not all you have, and we both know it." Matt didn't answer that. "Yeah," Torres said. "All right." After he hung up, Matt set the phone on the workbench and picked up a wrench. Across the lot, he could see Laura's dark blue sedan in the upper parking area. She was somewhere in the building, probably the 9th floor, probably looking at numbers, probably not thinking about the steel in the east wing. He went back to work. Torres didn't accept it. That evening, he submitted an updated presenter list to the Federal Review Coordinator. Under the demolition scope, he added one name, Matt Dawson, Dawson Salvage, subcontractor. The GC contract entitled him to do this. Subcontractors could present on their own scope at the GC's invitation. He didn't tell Laura. He didn't tell Neil. He'd worked with hundreds of subs over 22 years and could count on one hand the ones who deserved a seat at the table and never asked for it. The next day, Laura and Matt crossed paths on the east side of the site. He was coming down from the scaffolding. She was walking toward the stairwell. He nodded. She nodded. Neither spoke. But she noticed the notebook in his back pocket, the same one he always carried, and for a reason she couldn't name, she noticed it looked thicker than before. 2 days before the review, Laura received the federal team's final confirmation. She scrolled through the presenter list and stopped. Matt Dawson, Dawson Salvage, demolition subcontractor. She called Torres. "Who added Dawson?" "I did. No hesitation. He's my sub. He has a scope to present. The GC contract gives me that authority. This isn't a request, Ms. Brandt." Laura held the phone against her ear and said nothing. "I respect your position," Torres said. "But the contract is the contract." She set the phone down without a goodbye, sat still for a full minute. Then she opened her laptop. She'd already found the PE license. This time she went further. She searched Matt Dawson and Army Corps of Engineers. She searched Dawson and Fort Campbell. She ran his name through the federal project database. Almost nothing came back. No LinkedIn profile. No published papers. No industry conference appearances. No company bio. The man had spent 11 years building infrastructure for the United States military and left nearly no public trace, as if he'd passed through the professional world without making a sound. What she did find, one additional detail on the PE registry she'd missed before. The Fort Campbell Project, 2016, was listed as a military bridge rated for heavy armor loads. 60-ton vehicles. A bridge built to hold tanks. A man who had built bridges for tanks was cutting I-beams in a salvage yard off Route 35. Laura closed the laptop. The office was dark. Knoxville sparkled below the window, indifferent. She sat there for a while. She thought about the 3-page folder Neil had given her and the career it had erased. She thought about the way Matt moved along a steel beam. That slow, certain attention, as if the metal was speaking and he was the only one who understood the language. And she thought about the fact that she'd taken Neil's word for it, without checking, because it was easier. The next morning, Neil found her. Dawson's on the list. Torres put him there. I know. If he walks in looking like he just came off a flatbed, it reflects on us. The federal people will wonder why we put a junkyard operator on a $28 million project. Laura studied Neil for a moment. His pressed shirt, his clean hands, his certainty. She thought about the PE license he hadn't included in his folder, the 11 years he'd left out. I'll handle it, she said. Neil nodded and left. That afternoon, Laura drove to Mill Creek alone. No engineers. No clipboard. She parked in the lower lot and walked through the east wing, looking at the new beams without knowing exactly what she was looking for. She ran her hand along one of them the way she'd seen Matt do, flange, weld seam, mill stamp, and felt nothing except cold steel. Whatever he saw when he touched these beams, she couldn't see it. Not yet. Matt was in the adjacent section, pulling rivets with a pneumatic gun. The noise filled the building like a heartbeat. When he stopped to reload, the silence was sudden and total. He looked up and saw her standing 20 feet away, hands still on the beam. She met his eyes, held it for a second, 1 second, then turned and walked out. Her boots echoed through the empty section until the door swung shut. Matt set the gun down, looked at the spot where she'd been standing, then picked up the gun and went back to work. That night, Laura sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water she hadn't touched. The house was quiet. Her laptop was open to the same page. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Affiliate, 2008 through 2019. She'd told Neil she would handle it. She still didn't know what that meant. But for the first time since she'd taken the CEO chair, the Federal Review wasn't the heaviest thing in the room. The heaviest thing was a question she should have asked 2 weeks ago and didn't. A question she'd traded for convenience, for speed, for the comfort of trusting someone who'd been there longer. Why did Neil Gentry hand her a file with half of a man's life cut out of it? Thursday morning, 8:45, the 9th floor conference room at Brandt Development. Laura sat at the head of the table, progress reports arranged in front of her. To her right, Neil and 2 Brandt engineers. Across, Rick Torres and his assistant project manager. At the far end, 2 federal brownfield representatives. And in the corner, a man in a navy sport coat over a white shirt. No tie. No briefcase. A single folder on his knee. He'd signed the visitor log as Harmon, CF title, Civilian Technical Advisor, USACE. No one had spoken to him. No one had looked twice. Laura opened the review. She walked through the timeline, the budget, the environmental clearances. Precise, controlled, thorough. This was the meeting that would release $11 million, and she'd rehearsed it until the numbers were muscle memory. At 9:12, the conference room door opened. Matt Dawson walked in. Work boots. A gray shirt with metal dust on the left shoulder. He'd come straight from the site. A thin folder under his arm. The room paused. Laura looked up. She saw the work clothes, the dust, the boots tracking site grit onto the carpet. She saw Neil's eyes flick toward her. She thought about the 2 federal representatives across the table, about the 11 million, about what this looked like to people who made funding decisions. She stood. Her voice carried the full length of the table. Go back to your scrapyard. This is a federal review, not a flea market. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. 14 people heard them. The air went still. Matt didn't move. He looked at Laura, not with anger, not with surprise. He looked at her the way someone looks at weather, as something that happens and passes. Then he pulled out a chair, set his folder on the table, and sat down. Laura stayed standing. The silence in the room had weight now. In the corner, the man in the navy sport coat closed his folder and stood. He walked to where Matt was sitting, slow, measured, each step deliberate. He stopped beside the chair, set his shoulders square, then raised his right hand and held it. Brigadier General Frank Harmon, United States Army, retired. Civilian Technical Advisor, Army Corps of Engineers, Knoxville District. 3 full seconds. Then he lowered his hand. I know this man. In 2016, we built a bridge together at Fort Campbell. Mr. Dawson was the lead structural engineer on that project. The bridge is still standing. Still rated for heavy armor. Still exactly where he put it. Nobody in the room moved. Harmon turned to the federal representatives. There's one more thing. He opened his folder and set a document on the table, a photocopy with a federal stamp. In 2018, Mr. Dawson filed a structural safety report with the Federal Inspector General regarding a project in Hamilton County. He identified load-bearing defects the contractor had ignored. The investigation confirmed every finding. The contractor was fined $180,000 and lost a $14 million federal contract. He placed the document where everyone could reach it. I brought this because I recognized Mr. Dawson's name on the subcontractor list last week. I wanted the federal representatives at this table to know who's working on their project. Laura looked at the document, looked at Matt. He sat with his hands flat on the table, eyes forward, expression unchanged. Neil Gentry sat perfectly still. Under the table, his right hand had closed tight. He knew the Hamilton County project. He had been the project manager on the other end of that report. Laura looked down at her own hand. She was still holding the pen. The same pen she'd been holding when she told a decorated Army engineer to go back to his scrapyard. She set it on the table, slowly, as if setting down something she couldn't carry anymore. The federal representatives asked for a 10-minute break. Neil stood and walked out of the room. Laura saw him reach for his phone before he cleared the doorway. Harmon returned to his corner seat. Torres leaned over to Matt and said something no one else heard. When the room reconvened, the lead federal representative looked at Matt. Mr. Dawson, would you present your demolition scope? Matt opened his folder. 6 pages. He spoke for 6 minutes. Conditions found, classification system, completion timeline, material recovery projections. Every number exact. Every sentence complete, and nothing more. He didn't look at Laura. Not once. The federal team asked 2 questions. He answered both without elaboration, closed the folder, and sat back. The remaining hour of the review proceeded without interruption. Neil returned midway through, sat at the end of the table, and said nothing. No one directed a question to him. The 2 brand engineers beside him had shifted their chairs, barely an inch, but an inch was enough. Afterward, in the hallway, Harmon shook Matt's hand. Saw your name last week. Wasn't sure it was you. Thank you, General. I confirmed a fact. That's all. Harmon nodded once and walked to the elevator. Laura was standing at the far end of the hall. She'd followed them out, waded through the handshake, through the quiet exchange. When Harmon was gone, she walked to Matt. She didn't say sorry. She said, I was wrong. Matt looked at her. 3 seconds passed. The hallway smelled like floor polish and recycled air. Yes, he said. He picked up his folder and walked to the stairwell. His boots echoed on the tile until the door closed behind him and the hallway was silent. Laura stood there, alone, for longer than made sense. That afternoon, she locked her office door and opened the Hamilton County report. Torres had pulled the full document from the Federal Inspector General's public database. Indexed, searchable, available to anyone who bothered to look. She read it from the first page. Matt Dawson, listed as lead structural engineer on the pre-construction review team, had identified load-bearing defects in 4 primary support beams. He documented the findings with measurements, photographs, and load calculations. He submitted the report to his project manager through the standard internal channel. The report was received, acknowledged, and filed. No corrective action was taken. Construction continued. 6 weeks later, Dawson filed directly with the Federal Inspector General. The investigation took 4 months. Every finding was confirmed. The contractor was fined $180,000. The $14 million project was canceled. Page 9. She found what she hadn't realized she was looking for. The project manager listed on the contractor's side. The man who had received Matt Dawson's internal safety report, signed the acknowledgement, and buried it. Neil Gentry. Laura read the name 3 times. She closed the report, placed it in her desk drawer, and turned the lock. She sat with her hands flat on the desk. The office was quiet. Outside the window, the afternoon light had gone gray. She'd handed Neil the authority to evaluate the man who'd ended Neil's previous career, and Neil had returned a 3-page folder designed to make a decorated engineer disappear. Now she understood the missing pages. Not incompetence, not oversight, self-preservation. And it meant that everything Neil had told her about Matt Dawson, every dismissal, every caution about image, had been a lie shaped like advice. She opened her laptop and pulled up the project's material procurement logs. She'd never reviewed them personally. Procurement was Neil's domain. Tonight, she would start. Laura didn't confront Neil, didn't call him into her office, didn't change the way she spoke to him in the Monday status meeting. On Friday morning, she called the third-party inspection firm listed in the project's federal compliance file. Every brownfield project using federal dollars was required to keep an independent inspector available on demand. The developer could activate the clause at any time. I'd like to schedule a material verification at the Mill Creek site. Structural steel, East Wing. She gave them the batch numbers from the procurement log. The inspection was set for Monday. Neil didn't know. The request went from Laura to the firm. It never touched his system. Monday afternoon, 2 inspectors arrived with portable testing equipment. They checked mill stamps, batch numbers, and material grades on 11 beams in the East Wing. Matt was working in the adjacent section. He saw them arrive, saw them examining the same beams he'd written about for 3 weeks. He didn't say anything, kept working. Laura came to the site that afternoon. She walked past Matt's zone on her way to the East Wing, where the inspectors were finishing up. She stopped beside him. He was packing tools. Almost done, she said. 2 more days on this section. She nodded, looked toward the East Wing, then back at him. Thank you for your work on this project, she said. It was a strange thing to say to a man she'd told to go back to his scrapyard 13 days ago. Matt looked at her and didn't respond. But he held the look for a beat longer than necessary, and she didn't break it. Tuesday evening, the inspection report landed in Laura's inbox. 2 batch lots, 11 beams, steel grade installed, A36. Project specification, A572, grade 50. Lower yield strength, lower tensile capacity. The difference between a beam that would hold for 50 years and one that would start showing fatigue in 15, especially under the second-story load the project plan called for. The substitution saved roughly $340,000 on material procurement. It also meant 11 beams in the East Wing of a federally funded project were carrying less strength than the drawings promised. Not enough to collapse tomorrow. Enough to fail eventually, quietly, in a way that someone would discover only after it was too late to blame anyone specific. Attached, the material substitution authorization form. 1 signature at the bottom. Neil Gentry, VP Operations, Brant Development Group. Laura read the report twice. Closed the laptop. She called her father. Dad, I have a problem. She kept it short. Material substitution. Documentary evidence. Neil's name. Tom Brant was 67. He'd built this company from a pickup truck and a set of hand-drawn plans. He listened without interrupting. 10 seconds of silence after she finished. You know what to do, he said. I know. He hung up. Laura sat in her car in the driveway for a long time, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. The streetlights were on. The neighborhood was still. She thought about the hallway at Brant Development. The way Matt had looked at her when she said I was wrong. The single word he'd given back. Yes. Not angry. Not bitter. Just true. She went inside and left the porch light on. Saturday morning. The salvage yard. October in Knoxville. The light came through the trees behind the fence at a low angle, turning the edges of the stacked steel gold before the sun climbed higher. Sam was in his usual chair by the door, eating an apple and watching his father sort steel recovered from the Mill Creek job. Matt worked in his usual silence, tagging each piece, stacking by grade, writing weights in his notebook. A car pulled up outside the gate. Dark blue sedan. Laura stepped out and walked through the open gate. She stopped inside the yard and looked around. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but organized in a way that only made sense if you understood metal. Beams sorted by length, plates stacked by thickness, tools hung on a pegboard in order of size. Matt saw her, set down his marker, didn't speak. Sam looked up from his apple, studied her for a second, then went back to eating. Laura walked to the workbench. I need to talk to you. All right. She set a copy of the inspection report on the steel surface. Grade mismatch. Substitution authorization. Neil Gentry's signature. Matt picked it up, read it through, turned to the batch numbers, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out his notebook. Flipped to a page near the middle. 3 entries, locations, batch numbers, dates. The same beams. The same problem. I saw this my second week on site, he said. Laura looked at the notebook. Why didn't you say anything? Wasn't my contract. She stared at him. He was right. And the fact that he was right made it worse, because the person whose contract it was, whose job it was to catch this, had been the one doing it. Now I'm asking, she said. Matt tore the 3 pages from his notebook and set them on the bench beside the report. When she reached for them, her fingers brushed his hand. Neither pulled away for a half-second longer than the moment needed. Laura gathered the pages, turned toward the gate. At the entrance, she stopped and looked back into the yard. Matt had already returned to his work, tagging a piece of channel iron with blue chalk. Salvageable. Sam watched her leave, looked at his father, took another bite of the apple. Neither of them said anything. That was how mornings worked here. Monday morning. Brant Development. 9th floor. Laura called an emergency board session at 8. She placed 3 documents on the table. The inspection report, the substitution authorization with Neil's signature, and the original specification. She read the findings, walked through the timeline, and identified the authorization. No editorializing. Neil sat at the end of the table. He didn't deny it. The documents were too clean. The board voted. Termination, effective immediately. All materials forwarded to legal counsel and federal oversight. Neil stood, looked at Laura one last time, and walked out. 2 days later, the steel replacement began. Matt was still on site, 3 days left on his demolition scope, pulling the last headers in the west section. Laura walked onto the site in the afternoon. Work boots, hard hat, no heels. She crossed to the west section and stopped near the column where he was stacking tools. I owe you a real apology, she said. Matt set a wrench in the box, closed the lid, straightened up. You already said it. I said I was wrong. That's not the same thing. She paused. I'm sorry. Matt looked at her. The site was loud, grinders, compressors, boots on scaffolding, but between the two of them it was quiet. He nodded. Once. And it was enough. Friday. Last day of the demolition contract. Matt's crew finished by noon. Old steel removed, sorted, trucked back to the yard. Rick Torres signed the completion form and shook his hand. Anytime, Dawson. Matt nodded. He was loading the last tools into his truck when Laura walked across the parking lot. Dawson. She stopped a few feet from the tailgate. We're replacing all the east wing steel. I need an independent structural reviewer, not a demo sub, not an internal engineer. A licensed PE who can verify every beam meets spec. Matt looked at her. I'm asking you, she said. A moment. The wind pushed dry leaves across the asphalt between them. Send the scope, he said. She nodded, turned, took 2 steps and stopped, her back still to him. You should know. I found Neil's name in the 2018 report. He was the project manager on the contractor side, the one who dismissed your safety findings. Matt set a toolbox in the truck bed. I know. Laura turned. You knew? Since when? Since the first day I saw his name on the org chart posted at the site trailer. The parking lot was empty except for their trucks. A sheet of paper skidded across the pavement in the October wind. Why didn't you say anything? Matt looked at her, the same direct, unhurried gaze he'd given her in the hallway when she'd told him she was wrong. Because nobody asked. Laura held his eyes for a long time. The wind moved her hair across her face, and she didn't fix it. Then she walked to her car, got in, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. That evening, Matt picked Sam up from the neighbor's house and drove to the yard. They ate dinner at the workbench, 2 takeout containers, 2 bottles of water, 2 folding chairs pulled up to the steel surface. The shop lights were warm and yellow. Outside, the first stars were showing through the tree line, and the air smelled like October. Sam finished eating and drifted to the doorway. He stood there looking out at the yard, steel sorted in rows, chalk marks fading in the evening damp, everything in its place. Matt cleaned up, threw the containers away, turned off the overhead lights, and left only the small lamp by the door. His phone buzzed. Email. Laura Brandt. Subject line. Structural review. Scope of work. He looked at the screen for 2 seconds. Put the phone back in his pocket. Come on, he said. Let's go home. Sam walked to the truck without hurrying. Matt stood in the doorway for a moment, not looking back into the shop, but outward, past the fence, past the tree line, to where the sky had gone dark except for a thin band of amber light still holding along the ridge. Then he stepped out, pulled the door shut behind him, and walked to the truck where his son was waiting.